I'm Dean Ackerman, and I am the 7th police chief in the 100-year history of the Glen Rock Police Department, and it's my pleasure to lead the organization during this anniversary. In 1894, when Glen Rock was first formed, life was much simpler. Glen Rock was an agrarian community of a few hundred residents and a bunch of farms. As the 20th century emerged, Glen Rock became a great deal busier. A trolley system going from Patterson to Suffern was built, and the railroad began to make its mark, and Glen Rock began to grow. As we proceeded into the late 1900s and approached 1920, Glen Rock realized that it was time to have a full-time police department. From the borough's inception, when law enforcement services had been needed, they had a few part-time borough marshals who were issued nothing more than a nightstick, a gun, and a badge, and had no real police training. A number of serious events occurred in the community that caused the town fathers to rethink that.
Hi, my name is Detective Sergeant James Kolaski with the Glen Rock, New Jersey Police Department, and I've been asked here to speak about some of the more interesting cases that we've received at the Glen Rock Police Department over the years. A couple years ago, I received my master's degree in history from the William Patterson University, and as part of my history studies there, I did a lot of research on the history of the Glen Rock Police Department, and I came across a lot of very interesting cases throughout the years that I thought were very interesting. They kind of run the gamut from anything from people complaining about their chickens being stolen back in the 1920s, when Glen Rock was a very agricultural and more rural area, to homicides that happened over the years. We had a few homicides, train robberies with shootouts, with bandits, and we had a Nazi spy in Glen Rock that was arrested by the FBI. Not many people are aware that the Glen Rock PSE&G right-of-way that runs through town right now used to be a trolley line, a light rail trolley line back in the early 1900s. There's a trolley line that ran from Suffern, New York, all the way down to Patterson, to the city of Patterson through Bergen County, and where the railroad tracks go down along Wild Park, between Wild Park and Glen Avenue, the trolley line was actually elevated over the railroad tracks so the two could pass. In fact, if you go into Wild Park today, you can still see the concrete foundations for the elevated portion of the trolley line. On August 3rd, 1915, a young man and woman were on the trolley and disembarked a stop earlier than they had planned to, and they decided to walk down the trolley tracks to their anticipated stop at the time. It was dark, it was evening time, and they said that they did not realize they were on the elevated portion of the tracks when a trolley started approaching them from the other direction. With nowhere to go, the young man hung off the side of the railroad tracks by his hands to avoid being hit by the trolley that was coming. Unfortunately, the young woman was unable to do so, and she was struck by the trolley and then thrown about 20 to 30 feet to her death below. And it's one of the more tragic stories that we've uncovered in our police blotter entries. On July 22nd, 1911, there was a very serious head-on collision between two trolley cars in the area of what is now the PSE&G right-of-way off of Grove Street in Glen Rock. The cause of the crash was a bend in the tracks that hindered visibility of the train operators. There was a trolley going northbound and a trolley going southbound. Three individuals were killed, and there were 12 that were hurt and taken to local hospitals. And it was one of the more serious trolley accidents on that line, and it happened right here in Glen Rock. One of the leading causes for the formation of the police department was some issues we were having in town regarding the railroad tracks, especially along the main line that runs along Main Street, and there were some issues with bandits and train robberies and even some shootouts down there. There was a train yard in Lower Doremus Park. In fact, the turntable or roundabout turntable for the trains still exists and is in Lower Doremus Park. You can see that today, the remains of that as well. And back in 1910, there was a train robbery, and in 1915, there was also a train robbery where there was shootout with railroad police officers, the bandits, and the Glen Rock Police Department. Just like the Wild West, where you had a shootout as they were trying to, the great train robbery of Glen Rock, so to speak. And so that was a leading cause for the formation of the police department.
Glen Rock began moving towards a full-time police department, and on September 1st, 1918, a Ridgewood police officer by the name of James Houlihan was appointed as Glen Rock's first police officer. James Houlihan grew up in Ridgewood in the late 1800s and joined the U.S. Army Cavalry. He was a veteran of the Spanish-American War and was discharged in 1904. 3 years later, he would join his father, James Houlihan Sr., as a police officer in Ridgewood, and he would serve there until 1918 when Glen Rock hired him. Chief Houlihan was a highly decorated and well-respected law enforcement officer in the early 1900s. He employed the use of police dogs to track down criminals and missing persons, and patrolled Glen Rock originally on a bicycle. He was charged with not only maintaining law and order, but organizing Glen Rock's first full-time police department. By 1928, the Glen Rock Police Department had grown to 7 full-time police officers, providing services to the town 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They patrolled town by car, the one car that they had, motorcycle, and bicycle. Routine police activities included responding to overflowing cesspools, lost children, break-ins, animal bites. A number of the entries in the blotter at that time not only wrote of animal bites from dogs, but also from horses, who were very much still in service in that day, as not every Glen Rock resident had a car yet. Many lighthearted incidents, such as neighbors complaining about chickens running loose, and a woman calling up and asking the police to go find her husband, who went out to a local show and was too drunk to walk home, and they brought the man home.
A few years ago, we started putting historical blotter entries onto our social media pages for the Glen Rock Police Department, and one of the most popular stories or blotter entries that we posted was about an individual on Sunday, August 7th, 1921. He was picking berries off of Lincoln Avenue in where there were sand pits at the time, and he complained that he had been shot. The Chief Houlihan at the time investigated and found that the shots came from a local resident off of Lincoln Avenue who actually owned the berry bushes that were being picked. However, the victim did not want to make a complaint, so the chief had let the perpetrator go on the promise that there would be no more shooting. So that was one of the ones that really garnered a lot of interest for our online social media pages.
The early years of the Glen Rock Police Department also saw Prohibition, the national prohibition against alcoholic beverages, which was not exactly a major success. One of the pictures in the Glen Rock Police Archives is of a police officer in 1929 standing next to a still he discovered in the basement of a Grove Street home. The Glen Rock Police Department remained relatively stable until the end of the Second World War, when the police department grew to 15 officers, instituted the use of a two-way radio system, greatly reducing the response time to calls throughout the community, and the police department began fielding more and more calls for service as the population of Glen Rock grew. Through the 1950s into the 1970s, Glen Rock grew to a community of 13,000 residents. More and more homes, businesses, and schools were built throughout the growing community. Like much of northern New Jersey, many people left the cities hoping to have a better life in the suburbs. And with that came more activity and more demands upon the police. Officers began to drive more police cars that were equipped with first aid equipment, radar units. We began to improve training and weaponry and the equipment we carried to respond to calls. Like any other community, Glen Rock certainly saw its fair share of crime, and while generally a safe community, it does not mean that things do not happen here.
837-820-584.
On the evening or early morning hours of September 9th, 1974, about 1 o'clock in the morning, there was a report of several shots being fired on Highland Road. And Officer Jay Green, Frank Kozar, and Robert Brindley were working that evening, responded to the area.
While Officer Kozar attempted to save the man's life who had been shot, Officer Green and Officer Brindley pursued the armed suspects through backyards and onto East Gramercy.
2 men were seen running from the area the shots fired. 1 man ran to a residence on Harristown Road, who was the victim who was shot, and Officer Kozar rendered first aid to the victim, while the other officers conducted a house-to-house search through the yards along Harristown.
Officer Green was able to catch up to the man, hold him at gunpoint until backup arrived. He recovered the weapon with 5 spent shell casings. Ultimately, the man was taken to jail, and the man who was shot survived due to the officer's prompt actions.
On August 11th, 1953, a 2.5-year-old boy who lived on Brookfield Avenue wandered away from his home approximately 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And it actually resulted in the Glen Rock Police Department, including surrounding police agencies, Boy Scouts, auxiliary police. There was state police from New York that came down with bloodhounds, state police from Wayne that came with bloodhounds, and even civil defense units were all called in to conduct a search of the area, which at the time was sand pits and swampy area. This boy apparently was playing with his dog, and as the dog wandered away, the boy wandered away, and he actually was not found until about 9:45, 10 o'clock the following morning in Fairlawn. And he was missing for almost a good 20 hours while the police were searching for him. So that's one of the another interesting case that the police had to round up available manpower and assistance of other agencies nearby to help us with one of our cases.
Late in the evening on November 30th in 1973, a residence on Gramercy Place was held up at gunpoint. The robbers fled the house with money and valuables, while the residents called for police assistance. Officer George Miller, who monitored the call by radio, quickly located the vehicle, pursued it, and ran it off the road. He held the robbers at gunpoint until officers Jay Green and Alvin Stonehouse arrived to assist him. The officers were able to recover all of the residents' belongings, the weapon used in the robbery, and take all 3 men into custody, who subsequently did state prison time. One thing that has remained consistent through the years is that the members of the Glen Rock Police Department have always been skilled marksmen. Going back to the early days of the Glen Rock Police Department and going through into the late 1980s, members of the department shot competitively in the old-time police pistol leagues, and when I first began here in 1986, the whole police headquarters was filled with trophies from one end to the other. Today, Glen Rock police officers regularly engage in firearms qualification, and we have an officer who is part of the Bergen County Regional SWAT Team, a skilled group of police officers drawn from agencies throughout the county that are top-level marksmen in top physical condition and trained to respond to active shooter events. As we entered the 1980s, Glen Rock was on the forefront of technology. We were one of the first police departments to begin computerizing records. We also participated in what was called the Old RAIN Network, the Regional Enforcement Information Network that allowed us to communicate with other law enforcement agencies, the county, the state police, and the FBI. In an instant, a police officer could call a license plate into the dispatcher, and the dispatcher, with a few keystrokes, could tell the officer everything about the vehicle and its owner. This would later grow into a state-of-the-art computer network, where today every police car is equipped with its own computer. In 1994, the antiquated Glen Rock Police Communications Desk was shut down, and communications function was outsourced to the state-of-the-art Regional Communications Center, the Northwest Bergen Central Dispatch, jointly owned with the Village of Ridgewood. And with that came computer mapping, 911, and the ability to track cell phones and bring to the Glen Rock residents all of the modern technology that you see on TV. In the years after September 11th, 2001, it was realized that Glen Rock had outgrown its cramped, antiquated facilities, and it was time for a new police station. That went hand in hand with the borough's need for a new borough hall that we had outgrown. In July of 2007, the Glen Rock Police Department and Borough Hall Services were moved to 175 Rock Road behind CVS and operated out of there until 2010, when we moved into the state-of-the-art police headquarters. The police station is video monitored, is set up for recorded interviews of suspects, has state-of-the-art computer equipment, and meets the needs of the 21st century. The world has seen many changes since 1918. The community leaders of that time could never have imagined how Glen Rock would have grown, the vast changes in technology and the changes in the world, both positive and negative. When the Glen Rock Police Department was first formed, women did not have the right to vote. The 19th Amendment had not yet passed. Today, women serve as sworn officers in the Glen Rock Police Department and as community leaders in various capacities. The challenges facing law enforcement in the 21st century are numerous and varied. Domestic terrorism, active shooters in schools, the heroin epidemic, cybercrime, and many other things that could never have been imagined 100 years ago. Wherever the future may lead us, the Glen Rock Police Department is ready and equipped to go there with society. While the leaders of 1918 could never have predicted what direction Glen Rock was going to go into, they were forward-thinking. They were on the forefront of forming a police department and building a foundation upon which today's Glen Rock Police Department was built. Without their forethought, we would not be where we are today.